Welcome to CapPlus's webinar, and thank you for joining us. For those of you who don't know us, CapPlus equips financial institutions in emerging economies to deliver finance profitably for social impact. We provide capacity building services to financial institutions so they can offer financial services to small businesses who in turn can expand, create jobs, and deliver services to their communities. I want to take this opportunity to let you know about our next webinar, which will be on February 7th. The topic will be on marketing, especially to small business entrepreneurs. Hold the date on your calendars, and we will send out more information in January. Webinars are always more interesting when the audience asks questions. So please submit your questions by typing in the chat box on your screen. You can submit questions throughout the webinar, although we may hold most questions until the end of the presentation. So now I'd like to proceed and introduce today's presenter. Kelly Roberts-Robbins is an impact management specialist with experience in 12 OECD and emerging market economies. She leads projects on social and environmental impact assessment for funds and investees. She integrates impact management tools into core business activities for financial institutions and is involved in women's financial inclusion. She has conducted impact evaluations and impact reporting of investor portfolios and refined gender and environment and social management systems for commercial banks, investors, and funds. So with that, I will turn the mic over to you, Kelly.
Thank you, Lynn. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. We're all here today to talk about social and environmental performance measurement. So I want to start with thinking about what that is. At a basic level, social and environmental performance measurement is about the analysis of data about outputs and outcomes. Usually, there's a theory of change connected to how that analysis is done. This is because most banks do some of their performance measurement for their own ESG or impact reporting, or maybe to report to funders and investors so that they can use it for impact reporting. But I don't just want to talk about measurement today. What I really want to talk about is performance management. So what is the difference? Performance management is about using what you measure and analyze in a feedback loop that helps inform your business decisions. So it's one step beyond performance measurement. It's really about taking that measurement and using it to create value for your business. But before I launch into the details of this, I'd like to make sure that I'm tailoring what I say to you today to fit the needs of your institutions. So I'd like to hear from you about what you're working on now.
So our first poll should be appearing on your screen. Please click on all the answers that apply. The question is, which of the following are current priorities for your institution? Please go ahead and respond. Your choices are developing a new SME product, offering existing products to a new market, increasing market share with existing products, executing a new or updated SME strategy, or updating our strategy. So if you could please respond and let us know what are priorities for your institution. And as you can see, these choices really have to do with performance management as well as performance measurement. And we'll give you a few more seconds to respond. And with that, let's close the poll and see what the results are. So as you can see on your screen, the most frequent priorities for the institution are increasing market share with existing products and executing a new or updated SME marketing strategy. 62% of you selected both of those. Then we had another tie at 43% at developing a new SME product and offering existing products to a new market. And then 38% of you said updating our strategy. So Kelly, back to you.
Thank you, Lynn. And I'm glad that many of these resonated with you all, because it means that what we're talking about today really can help you. And that's because in addition to risk management and compliance, which are the typical uses of performance measurement and management, performance management can also be used for many of the things that we're just discussing in the poll. For example, uptake of new products, new product development, or new channels for the existing products, and strategic decisions about how to capture more market share and drive financial performance. So those are the things I'm going to focus on today, rather than strict reporting for risk management and compliance, but I'm happy to have questions about those subjects at the end. So before I jump into the nitty-gritty of how performance management systems are developed, I thought I'd take a look at an example first of a successful case. Sometimes performance measurement is something that a bank is already doing that can be applied directly to solve specific strategic directions questions. This happened in one case of a bank I worked with in Costa Rica, BAC Bank, which through an Andy-funded pilot executed by the consulting firm Include, they investigated their SME products. And I realized that there was an evidence gap that they were facing. So they had a dedicated SME department and were considering strategies to develop a new product for women SME clients. And they had several options in mind, but like in any bank, they needed to choose an area to focus their limited resources, and it needed to be a choice that would put them ahead of the competition right away. So, like all banks of their size, they were already doing some performance measurement, but not necessarily using that in a performance management way that helped them address this question. So, they were looking to use some of the key performance indicators they already reported. And in fact, they already had some data that was available by gender. However, this information wasn't being used well for the decision that was in front of them, because it didn't actually tell them which new or updated product would fill the gap that their government-owned competitors weren't already filling. So their internal data wasn't really helping them make that decision. So through their relationship with the consulting firm, they went through an assessment process that took their existing data, their existing performance measurement, right, and compared it with market data about products that SME owners who were women needed and what they already received from the bank's competitors. And that way the bank could identify areas where the demand was high and where they already had a market edge. So this intelligence, along with many other factors, of course, could inform product development strategies, which are now underway in this bank. So this is a case where data that had been previously used primarily for financial analysis and reporting to investors and regulators was now useful for the bank in a different way, a way that transformed what they were doing from performance measurement to performance management. And in this case, without gathering any new internal data, the bank was able to transform that process from a reporting mechanism into something that was useful for their strategy. So this is an example of using measurement for performance management. And in that case, it was a one-off project done with technical support consultant. So what would it really take to install an internal system for an SME bank that could do this process over and over, right? That could feed the information into performance management making decisions. Performance management needs to be an internal system, not just a practice. And the components of that system at a really high level, let's just gloss over them quickly, include KPIs, analysis, standards, and operating procedures. So what I mean by KPIs are having key performance indicators, that is, measures against which you, or dimensions against which you measure, excuse me. So there are some fine distinctions between terms like metrics and indicators and data points that get thrown around by players in this space, but basically what we're talking about here are those dimensions that you're measuring, just those data points. Of course, you also need a consistent way of analyzing that data, which might involve comparing results with targets, goals that you set for your own institution, and potentially with benchmarks, like comparisons with a typical bank or with a best practice bank. Your institution can also take advantage of standard packages of these KPIs and analysis strategies that come already made for you. And you may already work with some of these through your relationships with funders or regulators. So one example of this kind of prepackaged set would be the Series SPI 4, which is used by Proparco and other funders. And finally, an SME institution needs a streamlined set of operating procedures to make sure that data collection and analysis happen regularly and in the same way each time, and that this information makes it into the hands of senior managers and others who are making strategic direction decisions. So what would it look like if an institution wants to upgrade the whole system with all of these components? So one example is that of Foreign Trade Bank in Cambodia. So Foreign Trade Bank partnered with the French Development Agency on an SME credit line. And as part of that transaction, they needed to do just this thing we're talking about, upgrade their performance management system from a measurement-based operation to a real feedback loop. And the reason for this was that it was required by the funder, since the credit line was focused on environmental and social impacts of water and energy access. Those were the types of SMEs that the credit line was for. The bank was already doing some of this kind of reporting, especially about environmental factors, because the governmental regulatory requirements in Cambodia were already quite strict and were increasingly so. So they were already doing quite some performance measurement related to the environment, but had not really integrated that into a performance management system, and now they needed to because of their funder. So not only were they looking to do that, looking for a performance management system that would help them do this, but they were also in a very common situation, which was that they needed to streamline this process with the regulatory requirements they already faced, so that all of this reporting wasn't a burden for them, but in fact a benefit for their organization. So what they did was work through technical assistance, which revealed that the bank could match many of the KPIs or many of the data points from the funder to the regulator. So many of the things that were required by both of those bodies could be reported in the same way. And they could collect all of the necessary data in one reporting form that fit into the loan officer's work stream. But a key issue for this institution was that so far some of this data had been collected on paper and some of it had been collected digitally. So the loan officer's current practice wasn't particularly conducive to making sure that the KPIs reported to the funder and to the regulator were done in the same way. So the document that created most of the upgrade in this case was digitizing that loan officer's reporting mechanism. And this document could then be used to automatically create some summarized reporting for the regulator, for the funder in this case, and for the management to use on an annual basis. So essentially created part of the board reporting. The management didn't use all the same analysis that the funder and the regulators did, of course, because they're working within their own strategy. But they did make use of some of the same KPIs, which multiplied the benefits of the time that was spent on this reporting, which was required anyway. And this bank then went on to deepen its SME banking relationships after the existence of this system upgrade through a partnership with Americ Microfinance, processing remittances. So FTB, Foreign Trade Bank, overhauled its whole performance management system, right? Systems like that include a lot of related components. First, it's necessary to review the internal use cases for the information, right? So that's how we get to the point where this is a feedback loop that you can use in your own institution. So by that, I don't mean thinking about what external parties want you to report, but what strategic decisions your institution frequently encounters where you wish you had more evidence. Second, it requires picking a very limited number of KPIs or data points that would create that evidence you want. And I always recommend starting with the list you already collect, potentially for external bodies. Third, it requires identifying any changes that are needed to integrate that data collection into your core systems, like the example we were just talking about where some of that collection was done on paper. It also requires considering if comparisons against external data, like market performance data, would be useful. And external parties like funders often have access to this data already. So, and they're already using it, right, to analyze your performance as you report it. So this is something you can ask for, not that you necessarily need to dedicate your own human resources to this project. Finally, installing a performance management system or upgrading the one that you already have means determining what operational procedures your colleagues need to collect the data quickly, efficiently, and as a part of their regular practices. And notice that this is the last part of the system design on the slide here in front of you and in the way that I'm describing it, because doing it this way, thinking about it last, is one way to end up with a really lean procedure, right? So going through the whole process of thinking about what the use cases are, what very, very limited number of KPIs would support that, and ideally only KPIs that you already report, integrating that into a digital system and benchmarking against external data means that once you get to designing the tool loan officers will use, it's a really, should be a really lean form that they're filling out, rather than a process that requires going back to former loans and picking out the information on a quarterly basis. So just to review about the examples that I talked about, most SME lending banks don't need to go through and upgrade each piece here, right? And I would guess that many of you have done some or all of these pieces of work already, right? So just like in our previous cases, usually the upgrade that's required is just in one or two places. So in one example, we were talking about really what was necessary was thinking through how external data could be used and how the data that was already there could be creatively mined to generate results that were useful for strategic decisions. rather than collecting new data, which was what the bank expected. And in the Cambodia example, what we're looking at here is a more lengthy process, but again, not a full overhaul of the system, rather an identification of what pieces were really needed to be upgraded, which were digitization primarily, as well as automating the process that digitization fit into, so that the resources spent on that process of changing the core system would pay off in time savings through that automation in the end. So this is a pretty complicated process, and I'm sure that many of you already have experiences with it. So I wanted to pause here to hear from you about those experiences with this quick poll. Lynn?
So, thank you, Kelly. The second poll should now be appearing on your screen. And we'd like to know about your real-life experience as it relates to performance management. So please click all of the challenges that fit your organization as it relates to using performance data for performance management at your institutions. Your possible choices are the ability to collect relevant information in your existing core banking system, cleaning errors in the data that you already have, bandwidth to assess the data you collect, and lastly, the fact that those who collect and report the performance data are not involved in the strategic decision making. So please please go ahead and respond, and we'll give this a few more moments for people to see to respond. And I can see that we are, it looks like we're pretty close to finished on the poll, so we'll close the poll. And we have a pretty overwhelming, well, two pretty significant challenges. Kelly, 96% said that their greatest challenge is ability to collect relevant information in the core banking system. 74% reported cleaning errors in the data that they already have. And then 33% had the last choice of those who collect and report the performance data not being involved in strategic decision making, and 26% reported bandwidth to assess the data we collect. So, Kelly.
Thank you, Lynn, and everyone for your thoughts. So, yes, of course, all of these are very real hurdles. So I'll share a few thoughts on clearing each of these hurdles, and then I hope that we can talk about this in a conversation portion at the end. So instead of the order you see them on the slide, let me think about responding to these in the order that they appear to be problems for each of your institutions. So I'm going to start with data collection. Basic segmentation, I think, is the most important way to start thinking about clearing data collection hurdles. This is because if you can segment your clients by demographic and by the product or service that they're receiving, there's a lot that can creatively be done with the rest, right? So even though KPIs have really proliferated in the industry in a way that generates this problem, right? That generates this inability to ask your clients for 1,000 different pieces of information. Not all of those KPIs are really necessary to make some pretty distinctive performance differences. So I think that paring it down to KPIs that help with segmentation is the best way to start. So for example, an SME bank like the first case we talked about in Costa Rica if they can disaggregate data by gender, then there's a lot that can be done with that, whether or not very much information is known about those clients. So in some cases of gender disaggregation, banks can't match a client, say, to the exact services that they need because they don't know enough about that client. So in some cases I've seen banks that know the gender of their clients but can't tell whether those clients are using the retail services because they have an informal micro enterprise, or if they really are using retail services for retail purposes, right? So there's no way to ask the clients that, and it would be unreasonable to think about trying to collect that information. But once an institution like that can gender disaggregate its data, so that's just one data point that can be done by loan officers, then you can use some sort of creative techniques to make a guess. So for example, a woman who's using a retail bank account for an informal enterprise will probably have more transactions per month than a retail customer, and therefore we can make a guess at which section, which market segment within the bank's clients might be open to cross-selling of different products. So there's a lot that can be done with a very few metrics, and I think starting there is a way to get over the hump of trying to dig through a mountain of data. I'd also like to think a bit about cleaning errors in the data. So this is an especially long process, to be honest, especially if the error results are because of a paper loan process, or historically that there had been a paper loan application process, or if the cleaning is not having to do with errors, but rather to do with missing data, right? So maybe loan officers have reported in different ways, or the reporting mechanisms or forms have changed, and so there's data that has different KPIs across the years. And yes, this is a real project to fix this. And ultimately, in every bank I've worked with, it involves digitization. So fortunately, the answer is quite an endeavor. But I will say that often SME banks approach this problem as an internal capacity issue and consider making new hires in order to do this. And I would say that investment in digitization rather than new hires is more effective in my experience. I'm thinking about getting management involved. So the great divide sometimes between the people who are gathering and reporting data and those who are doing the analysis, and the people in the bank that make the decisions. Solutions in the other areas that we're talking about now will probably not fix this, right? It will still mean that management is not closely involved with analysis or reporting, and in fact, the more efficient the system gets, the less they will be involved, which is exactly why performance measurement is not commonly used for internal performance management. But establishing some reporting systems that deliver annually or quarterly, or establishing systems that do some automated board reporting, like in the example we were discussing earlier, can address part of this divide. At least it can address the infrequency that management will ask ad hoc for this analysis, right? So setting it up as a system that is occurring on a certain frequency and that may not require management or loan officers to perform the analysis at request can help to address that issue. And also I would say that if you are reporting performance metrics to a funder, they are, of course, doing their own analysis and having their own analysis conversations. And in my work with those funders, I can tell you that they usually believe that they are feeding that information back to you. But in my conversations with banks, that's usually not the case of the feeling within the bank, right? So remember, of course, that you can request their analysis, meaning that there is at least one process where you don't need to clean the data and you can receive some of that analysis directly. Of course, it's not designed for your strategic decisions. That's the breakdown, right? But some of it might be relevant for that, and it can speak directly to your managers. Even though not so many people chose the question or the answer about bandwidth issues, I'll just really quickly say something about that. So reporting requirements for regulators and funders are tricky enough, right? And it's very infrequently necessary to be more complex than what you are already reporting to external bodies, in my experience. So usually it's more useful to make use of a few metrics you're already reporting on and think really carefully about which of those have some use cases in your own internal decision making, rather than adding a whole another layer, right? So it is a hurdle to get over design of using a performance management system internally, but ideally what we're aiming for here when we do one is to end up in a place where you're not doing anything else than you would already be doing for performance measurement for any external bodies like your regulator, but rather just using some of that information as if in a feedback loop that doesn't require any more data entry or any more reporting in the day-to-day basis than your institution is already engaged in. So where do you start? Like I was saying about market segmentation, I would recommend thinking about KPIs like the ones that appear on this list, which I have intentionally made really, really short. So the ones that I've found to be the most useful in creating business cases, say for you to take to management and say, I think this is the product we should focus on, are ones that take a look at number and volume, of course, which you're already analyzing, and things like NPLs, broken down by certain market segments. So gender is one we've already talked about. Age, if part of your market is particularly young in particular. By the size of SME you're serving, by the sector they're in. And my guess is that each of you looking at this are thinking, yeah, of course, we already know this, which is good, right? Because these KPIs are not some fancy new thing that needs to be added to on top of a system that's already a burden, right? These are things that you're probably already doing or partially doing, and they are real places to start in terms of thinking about which products are the best ones to concentrate marketing spending on, for example. So this is a suggested list that we'll share with you at the end of this webinar, but of course it matters what strategic decisions you're making. So I make this suggestion without knowing the use cases of each of your institutions. That is the important thing to think about first, as well as the metrics you're already collecting, and see what use you can make of those before you add new things to your system. So that was some suggestions about the KPIs themselves, but like I hope that I've been emphasizing all along here, it's not just about measurement, but also about the management system, right? So more than just the metrics that you report on. So here are a few sources of information for improving the whole performance management system that can give you a start without necessarily requiring technical assistance or an external body to help. And again, we can share these with their links afterwards. A few examples include, on the left, some KPI and target glossaries, so basically lists of KPIs and what they can be used for, including IRIS, the SDG indicators, and sources like the World Bank Findex. And then on the right, whole systems that can be taken as kind of pre-packaged systems. Linus is a new series-based tool, or SPI4 tool, that's used by a lot of funders, so it does fit typical KPIs that you may already be required to report. And there are some pretty short manuals for thinking through your existing system that Linus provides that can do a lot of what we are talking about today, that is offer templates for the different components of a performance management system. Of course, there are a few performance management systems that are really sector-specific or issue-specific. I'm mentioning here the MEDA Gender Equity Framework as one example. And then I think, although we're not going to cover it closely today, CapPlus already has some webinars some of you may have attended on business analytics. And I do think that there are typically connections between performance management analysis and financial performance analysis that you can find more information about on that webinar called Business Intelligence and Analytics.
So, I'm sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
No, my bad. Please go ahead.
So I just wanted to encourage you to submit questions, which we will be answering shortly. Meanwhile, we want to just offer one last poll to let us know how we can be of service to you. And we'd just like to know if you'd like some assistance in exploring how to use the KPIs you're already collecting to actually manage performance and make strategic decisions. So please go ahead and answer that. And meanwhile, I'd like to transition over to questions. And as I said, please enter your questions into the chat box. But meanwhile, a first question is, Kelly, if you can you tell us the most common pitfalls that financial institutions encounter when they're creating a performance management system?
Thank you, Lynn. Yes, so one of the pitfalls that I've seen quite frequently is one we've been discussing here already, and that is getting bogged down and having too many key performance indicators or too many data points, and not being able then to collect clean data or to determine how to use those data points for actual decisions you're making in your institution, which we've already discussed. Another area that I think is a real issue in the industry at large is that, of course, performance management systems are sometimes required by a funder. That doesn't mean that what they have in mind for the way that you would use your performance management system necessarily fits your strategic direction. Maybe it does, right? But if it's not designed internally, it might not. So making sure that your voice is heard in that process is really important. And I have found that doing so typically requires thinking through what those use cases are for yourself in advance of the conversation with the funder or with the consultant that they provide. And maybe we can talk about a few examples for particular institutions as we go through these question time.
Okay. Thank you. Another question is about arguments you have seen being successful when making a business case to the bank CEO to invest to create a more integrated performance management system. So what's a good business case to make to the bank leadership?
Let me turn the question around a tiny bit and say first what I've seen that doesn't work. So, to my surprise, it usually does not work to say this other institution installed such a system and here's the result they got. So while that's useful maybe to compare to other institutions in your market, I think in this operation and non-product question, it is not generally as useful as I would hope. However, bringing a particular example that you may have already pulled out of the data you already collect is a bit more home hitting, right? So like I was saying previously about making a lot out of a little bit of data, if you already have any different demographic KPI that you collect, say location or age, that can be used to generate some information already about what areas lack some uptake, and with a proposal about, say, a new marketing strategy that can be paired with the data evidence. And then at the end of that conversation, you can say, look, if we had more data analysis like this, we could do more examples like this. So I think embedding it in a conversation about the kind of results you would get is more effective. So to give one example, Access Bank Nigeria did a similar analysis, not something I worked on myself. I just am aware of their public progress with gender. So they have done some internal analysis that showed a lack of uptake of card usage among women, and so they used that data point within their international team to talk about a marketing strategy. So they did not create a new product. They created a platform that directly marketed to the segment that they saw was a problem. And that has worked pretty well for them, and then they've expanded that platform to serve other types of products.
Great. I like the idea of using existing data to make a case within the institution. That makes a lot of sense. One last question. Can you give another example of how performance measurement, how you've seen it integrated into other bank systems?
Yes. So integrating performance management, social and environmental performance management, into financial management is something that I think can have one of the highest payoff for institutions. But this does mean a digitization process for some smaller institutions, and it will mean for almost every institution some changes to the core banking system. So that will mean collecting information about loan recipients that is tied to the performance of those loans. Does that answer the question, Lynn?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I see we have one more question, and that is, do you have any suggestions or an advice on balancing competing priorities in determining and refining the KPIs? Each department or each customer segment or may have their preferences or different investors. So any suggestions on that?
When I work with institutions to improve their systems, I always start with regulator compliance because there is no choice there, right? Those are the KPIs you're going to report on no matter what. So thinking carefully about what you can do with that data inside your institution is key because you will be spending time on that data gathering anyway, right? So that's one.
Makes sense.
Another thing I'll say, another thing I'll say though is that sometimes I think this question should be taken the other way around, right? So part of what the data gathering is meant to do is help prioritize what strategic direction you're going to go in. Obviously, only one of many inputs into those strategic decisions, but I do think that it's worthwhile to think about collecting some broad data across your whole portfolio with just a few KPIs, and then thinking through how you apply that to each of your decision-making processes that you're going to do anyway. Right? So this is like a year one exercise. We just say, this is what we already collect and report for each management meeting. Is there a place that we can use this data? And that will help you get a feel for whether this is totally useless outside of your reporting requirements, or there are places where you can use the data you already have, rather than thinking about, okay, what evidence can we not get from this? Think about where you can start from with what you're already doing.
Great. Makes a lot of sense. With that, Kelly, I'd like to thank you again for your presentation and inspiring us to think about what we have to do in a way that really turns it to our benefit and improving our strategic decisions. And I'd like to thank everybody else for your attendance and your questions. And we look forward to the next webinar on February 7th, where we will be discussing marketing strategies to reach small businesses. Thank you, and we wish you a good day or a good afternoon or evening.